Hey guys, it's Nick, and in this video I want to talk about some facts about the EV market, and in the process apparently throw some cold water on the expectations of the Tesla fanboys out there that are way too optimistic about the stock price, and so maybe help them temper some of their expectations, especially with some of these claims that Tesla makes about possibly making 20 million cars by the year 2030. In a global car market of about 90 million or so new cars sold per year, for Tesla to sell 20 million cars, that would mean that they were about 25% of the global market. That's pretty unlikely, and I'll show you what is more likely to be a good selling car over the Tesla 3, and that's being shown right now in China. If you look on YouTube for the term Tesla killer car, you'll see these cars like the Lucid Air that has 135 horsepower and goes 235 miles an hour, or the Porsche Taycan or whatever it's called for $150,000, or a $1.3 million 1200 horsepower electric car. That's what comes to mind when people think the car that's going to beat Tesla is a car that has more horsepower and is a second quicker in its 0 to 60 times or something like that. But that's not the reality of the car market or the electric vehicle market. Now, although Tesla sold something like 70,000 Model 3s in China through August 2020, and they account for about 13% of the overall EV sales in China, Wuling Guang Mini EV had 9,100 units just in August, which is only its second full month of sales. So why is this selling so well compared to the Tesla 3? Well, for one, and mostly, is because it starts at $4,200, which is about 1/10 of what a Model 3 Tesla starts for. And the Guang Mini EV is a joint venture between General Motors and SAIC Motor, and I can't even pronounce this, Liuzhou Wuling Motors, but it's a state-owned Chinese car manufacturing company, basically. And so this is what a real Tesla killer looks like. This little car that's only been selling like 2 months already has orders for 50,000 of them in just a few months of being on the market. So it will very quickly, it seems, surpass Tesla Model 3 sales in China. Now, even though this car starts at $4,200, it still has things like anti-lock brakes, tire pressure monitoring, rear parking sensors, air conditioning, power windows, a stereo. So it is pretty much a standard car. It does all the things a car can do, and it is 1/10 the price of a Tesla Model 3. And in my mind, it's cars like these that are really going to take off and push the EV market to new levels, not some $40,000 car that very few people can afford. When the car market started back in the early 1900s, Ford was able to sell their Model T cheaper because of the assembly line, and because of its cheaper price, more people were able to buy it. So the cheap cars sell more than the luxury cars, obviously, and there's a much bigger market for cheaper cars. In my mind, the car manufacturers that are going to win are the ones that make cars so cheap that they are able to leapfrog from scooters and used cars. And so what is leapfrogging? Leapfrogging is when a country jumps over an intermediate step in technology. So a prime example is telephone wires and landline phones. A lot of countries never had the copper wires and telephone poles coming to large portions of their country. Instead of getting that, they skipped over to cellular phones. So they skipped or leapfrogged over fixed line landline phones into cellular phones. Another example is in China that never had a lot of credit card users, and now they're leapfrogging from credit cards right to direct payment like Alipay and WeChat right from their phone. So they jumped over the intermediate step of credit cards. And to show you a real live example of leapfrogging, here is telephones, internet users, and cellular phone subscribers by country in 1990 and in 2005. So one example here is Argentina. By 2005, they only had 227 telephone main lines per 1,000 people, but they had now 570 cellular phone subscribers. So they went from 93 mainline phones per 1,000 people in 1990 to 227, but they jumped from 0 in 1990 to 570 cell phone subscribers. So more than double the amount of telephone main lines. They just skipped over that and went right to cellular. And this, you could see that happening in a lot of countries. Look at Venezuela. They had 136 in 2005 of phone lines, and here they have 470 cellular phones per 1,000 people in 2005. So they just skipped right over the telephone lines. And to take it a step further, look at broadband subscriptions, not including cellular networks. So that means a physical cable to your house, internet access in your house from 1998. It's very low. I mean, the world is less than 15 per 100 people. Mexico is about the same. China is like, what, 27 per 100 people or so, even up to 2017. So most people don't have internet in their house, but they leapfrog into smartphones with internet access through the cellular network. And so you see China has over 100 cell phone subscriptions per 100 people. And so the world is over 100 also. Even Ethiopia is like 60 per 100 people. Whereas back here, even in 2017, the number of internet connections in people's houses is almost zero. So what does people switching to smartphones for their internet access instead of relying and waiting on broadband to come to their country or region have to do with electric vehicle sales? Well, I believe that eventually, if EVs get cheap enough, they will leapfrog over into the scooter market and the used car market. Now, I don't know the scooter market worldwide or the used car market, but I know that in the United States, new cars are about 17 million a year, whereas used car sales are like 40 million a year. Now, people don't buy used cars just because they like them. They buy them because they are a better alternative to new cars for their situation. Either they can't get a loan, they can't afford it, a new car is too expensive for them. So if EVs become cheap enough, like this $4,200 Chinese car, it could take a big portion of the used car market. And if it gets even cheaper, it could take a big portion of the scooter / motorcycle kind of market, where in a lot of Asian countries and developing countries, a lot of people aspire to buy a scooter because that's all they can afford for their mobility, even bringing their families on the scooter, 2-3 people at a time, doing their shopping and all of that. So if EVs become cheap enough, they can replace that market. And so that's a huge potential market for replacing scooters and a good chunk of used cars. According to this survey by Castrol Oil, of all companies, the road to mainstream EV adoption sticks on basically these three things: the price, the time to charge, and the range. And so the price tipping point is about $36,000. It varies in each country, but that's kind of the average. The charge time, about 30 minutes or less. And the range, 460 kilometers, which is about 270 miles or so. The difference between consumers is that they're more worried about the price, the charge time, and the range, whereas fleet managers are more worried about the range, the vehicle size and type, and then things like infrastructure to charge it. Price is fourth as a consideration. The biggest price I see right now with electric cars, at least from the US market, is that they are selling an inferior product for a much higher price than a similar product. So let's take a look at the Hyundai Ioniq, which is all electric. It starts at $33,000 and has a range of 170 miles. I don't know how long it takes to charge, but I assume it's over 30 minutes. So the price point is there for the tipping point, supposedly, at least that's what people say, but the range is not there and the charging time is not there yet. And if you have a great product, you don't have to have the government pay you to buy it. You will buy it yourself. So the fact that the government still offers incentives for people to buy electric vehicles, it's because they're not on par economically with what's available in the internal combustion engine market. So you can buy this $33,000 Ioniq with a 170-mile range, or you can buy this Hyundai Elantra, which is even a little bit bigger than the Ioniq, for $19,650. So it's more than 50%, about 60% cheaper than the electric car, and yet has a range of probably, I don't know, 400 miles or so, something along those lines. So you see that the only reason somebody would buy the Ioniq over the Elantra is just to make themselves feel good that they're doing something for the environment or something like that. But if it's purely economic, they would choose the Elantra every time over the Ioniq. And that's the problem with the EV market. So EV car sales are fighting an uphill battle until they get to the point where they are cheaper than a similarly equipped and spec'd ICE car. And that's not going to happen for a while. And Tesla knows they need to go cheaper if they want to get a large market share of the EV market, but there are so many competitors out there that it's almost impossible that they're going to take 25% of the EV market, or the worldwide car market for that matter, by selling Model 3s or even $25,000 cars that they say they're going to sell eventually. So let's get to the part of throwing some cold water on the valuation of Tesla and letting people see some reality and not just unicorns and fairies and stuff, and how Tesla's going to take over 100% of all the world car markets and have these self-driving cars that they have robo-taxis and all kinds of fancy stuff. Let's go back to this Castrol report, and here they say that if those three things of price, range, and charging time are met before 2025, the market in 2025 for EVs can be $376 billion for all EV sales. Let's look at what Tesla's market cap is today, $464 billion. So Tesla today is worth more than the potential EV market in 2025 of all EVs. So even if in 2025 they sold every electric vehicle, they would have 300 whatever billion dollars in sales, not profit, sales. And so their market cap is 464 billion today, and we are not anywhere near 360 something billion dollars in sales for EVs. Matter of fact, total EV sales worldwide is about 2 million today, and that's out of 90 something million new cars sold every year. So something like 2% of all new cars are EV sales. Now, maybe you're still not convinced and really think Tesla is going to hit 20 million in sales by 2030, even though in 2019 they only did about 370,000 or so cars. So they would have to do 50 times more cars within the next 10 years to reach that number. And like I said, that would be about 25% of the total world new car market, EVs and ICE cars combined. Let's just take a look at Tesla's competitors, and are they expected to just sit by and just let Tesla take 25% of the market and get up to 20 million sales? Let's see how many sales the biggest car manufacturers have right now. So at number 1 is Volkswagen with 10.8 million per year, Toyota 10.5, Renault 10.3, General Motors 8.7, Hyundai 7.5, Ford 5.7 million, Honda 5.2 million, Chrysler 4.8 million, Group PSA 4.1 million, Suzuki 3.2 million. So that doesn't include the Chinese manufacturers, which the top 5 or 6 are owned by the Chinese government. So these manufacturers have been making cars for, some of them, 100 years or so, and have been making way more complicated ICE engines and transmissions compared to electric motors and batteries. And so do you think they're really just going to stop and say, well, we've been making these much more complicated cars, but now that electric's going to be the next thing, we're just going to stop and let Tesla take over the whole market, especially when Panasonic and LG Chem make the batteries that go into most of these cars? The cars are getting simpler, not more complex. And so that means more people are going to be able to produce them at cheaper and cheaper prices. In China, the biggest car manufacturers are state-owned companies that have some joint ventures, like that $4,200 car is a joint venture of SAIC and GM, and so it is owned by the Chinese government, majority owned. And so these majority owned Chinese state-owned companies produce about 22 million cars in China. If you think that they are gonna let Tesla just come in there and outsell them and not give special deals to these car companies and special incentives for them to thrive in China and in the EV market in general, especially to lower the price of cars for Chinese and for exporting them to other countries, that's very unrealistic to think that. Here is the worldwide car production by year, and in 2019 was about 92 million cars produced, and EVs are only about 2 million cars per year, so like 2% of the total. So realistically, is Tesla really going to go and take 20 million out of this 92 million in car sales in 10 years? In EVs, is EVs even going to be 20 million or the 30 million that he said it's going to be in 6 or 7 years? Highly unlikely. And so that's the problem, is that when people get overly optimistic, they throw out all kinds of reason and facts, and they don't look at the numbers, they don't look at the earnings, they don't look at the 1,000 PE of Tesla. All they look at is the nice story that EVs are going to take over the world, and Tesla is going to be the Apple of EVs, being able to charge $40,000 for a car, as if somebody who normally could only pay $20,000 for a car is just automatically going to say, oh yeah, I can only pay $20,000 for a car, but this Tesla is so nice that I'm somehow going to find another $20,000 to buy this Tesla Model 3 when I can buy an equivalent spec car for half the price. That's not how it works in economics and in people's minds. Most people don't buy a car to impress their neighbors. They buy it to drive their family around and get to work and do things. And if you somehow convince yourself to still hold Tesla, even though it has a PE ratio, price to earnings ratio of 936 times earnings, you should remind yourself that the S&P 500 is about 25 PE, and that these companies do not grow forever, and they eventually go back down to around the PE of the S&P 500, around 25. So that would mean that if Tesla did that, it would be cut down by about 30, 35 times its current stock price. If Tesla ever got as big as Toyota, which sells over 10 million cars, they can expect to have a PE similar to Toyota of about 9, which is about 100 times cheaper than what Tesla currently trades for. Now, I know all Tesla fanboys' answer to that obvious fact is that Tesla is not a car company, it's a technology company, so you can't value it like Toyota or Volkswagen because it has magical driving software that's going to make trillions of dollars in the future. That's what Uber used to say also, especially before they went IPO. But if you read their S1 filing, even in their S1 filing, they said that they weren't likely to have self-driving cars anytime in the future. And even if they did, it would be only on certain routes during certain times of the day, during certain weather conditions, because it is so tricky. In fact, they're now saying that Uber is in talks to sell its self-driving vehicle division to a startup run by former Uber, Tesla, and Google executives and backed by Amazon. So basically, that dream that they were selling before the IPO of in a few years they're going to get rid of all the human drivers and just have robo-taxis driving all around printing money like crazy, that dream has come to an end, it seems. And so now Uber is just a taxi company with an app. What happens if the same thing happens to Tesla? Tesla just becomes an EV company that buys their batteries from Panasonic or whoever and throws together a car, just like every other manufacturer out there. And if you need one more reason to run the other way when you see the mass euphoria on a stock like Tesla, take a look at Cisco during the internet bubble. Cisco was sold as the people selling the shovels and blue jeans during the gold rush. And because they sold the routers for the internet that everybody knew was going to grow forever. And at its peak here in 1999, its PE was about 200 or so. And everybody thought that it was going to go on forever and ever. And everybody loaded up on Cisco. They didn't care about the PE. They didn't care about anything. They just bought the story. And look what happened to them. 20 years later, they still haven't recovered their original price. And their PE is now less than the S&P 500. It's 16. So it went from 200 something to 16, even though their revenues and earnings have grown substantially over the years. They weren't able to grow into that huge PE, which reminds me of a story of a guy I used to work with that had a really big nose and he was kind of short, and he used to joke that when he was small, he used to cry to his mother about how big his nose was and that the kids made fun of him. And his mother said, "Don't worry, you'll grow into your nose eventually." And he said, "Mom, I would have to be 10 feet tall to grow into this nose." And that essentially is what Tesla is. To grow into that 1000 PE, they would have to not only have the whole EV market and probably the whole car market on the whole planet, but maybe they might even need to have a new car market on Mars or something like that to grow into 1000 PE based on what the car market is now. So guys, I hope this video taught you a little bit about the car market and maybe convinced you to look further than just the nice story and look at the actual numbers of Tesla, the car markets, car prices, the Chinese market, the state-owned car companies that control that market. It's not all unicorns and rainbows for Tesla from here on in, even though most people think it is. I hope you liked this video. If you did, give me a thumbs up. If you disagree with what I said here, please leave a comment and tell me your theory about what's going to happen to Tesla and the EV market. As always, if you haven't subscribed, please subscribe now. Thanks for watching, guys.